Ross, our players, they cannot wait to play Magic. So we're going to head right down to the future match area here as Justin Brickman is starting things off here on the left with Is It Prowess versus Azorius Omniscience on the right here from John Silmack. Now, Ross, I know you've been playing a lot of this Is It Prowess deck. How do you feel about this matchup?
This matchup, I feel, is quite close. As far as the lockdown decks go, it's sort of unique among the lockdown matchups because it's the one where they have the least disruption for your aggro plan, but they are the most punishing if you try to slow play around temporary lockdown. Because if you slow play too much, they just combo and kill you on the spot, sometimes even through a counter spell or a bounce spell on the Omniscience. So you really have to find the right balance between aggression and holding up your potential answers for their combo. Now, here in game one, there's no counter spells in Brickman's main deck, but he can interact with an Omniscience via a removal spell or a bounce spell. So he's going to want to apply some pressure early and then start holding up a couple of those. But there's a little bit more impetus on him to end the game faster here in game one because those removal spells eventually become dead as Slimak makes land drops and can Abuelo's Awakening for high X values and make an Omniscience that's outside of burn range.
All right, so the first couple turns here, Brickman sleight of handed into Surveil. Then we played a Drake Catcher. Now he's stocked up. Not exactly the speed you were talking about winning in this matchup, but we have a lot of cards and 2 counters on that Drake Catcher. If you've been a little disconnected from Standard, this has been one of the cards that's popped up in these Is It decks as a little bit of a mirror breaker and, just a fine-ish prowessy creature to have. Yeah. As Omniscience hits the graveyard here.
It is a little bit weaker in these lockdown matchups because it doesn't apply as much pressure as Slickshot Show Off. It's not as good to get back from underneath a lockdown when you bounce one of those. So not the 2-drop that Brickman would have wanted to start on, but still perfectly capable of carrying this game by itself, really. If it makes 2 Drakes, that'll be plenty of pressure here.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to start with a sleight of hand here for Brickman. Now, we mentioned Brickman has no counter magic in the main deck. John doesn't know that, so we might see Brickman posture something like a Spell Pierce, even if we don't have it. But to see if John thinks they can or can't play around it. Monstrous Swift Spear is the play here, and the attack for 3 as Afara's Dispersal will bounce the Drake Catcher.
Yeah, and even if Brickman did have Spell Pierce in the main deck, Slimak saving his Dispersal until turn 3.
Yeah, a lot of bouncing going on in Standard. Not as, surprising how many different bounce spells we have as 2 lands hit the bin there from the Surveil.
Now, the format is so fast, you really need to answer creatures at 1 mana, and that means the 1 mana removal spells have a lot of holes, and it's turned out to be better to fill those holes with bounce spells rather than more expensive removal that might be size agnostic or answer a greater range of potential threats.
Yeah. All right. In a turn here, John's going to sculpt the hand a little more. John knows something is up as Justin didn't redeploy the Drake Catcher that we bounced. So John knows Brickman can interact, or at least is saying I can interact. The question is, can John beat that interaction?
So looking at John's list, does have 3 Spell Pierces as counterplay if he wants to go for an early Abuelo's Awakening. But here, his life total is still relatively high. I think he can afford to slow the pace down here, maybe interact another time or 2, make some more land drops, and then go off from a safer position.
All right, so Justin's figuring out how he wants to play this turn. I'm going to start with the Corey Shield Cutter. Spell Pierce from John. Brickman can pay, but if he does, he'll be tapping low.
Yeah, and I think there is a 5th land in hand for Brickman, but then he'd have to pay, then play the land, then play a second spell to get a token, and he'd be completely tapped out.
Yeah. John falling to 14 as the One Swift Spear did get a prowess trigger, even though the Corey Shield Cutter got countered.
I guess my eyes deceived me there. No 5th land for Brickman. I just wanted to see more copies of those gorgeous islands,
There are some good island choices. There's a lot of good land choices in play here right now.
Yeah.
I like those full art plains as well. As Abuelo's is going to be cast.
Okay.
All right. And you see Brickman sort of being like, all right, now there is a moment where John can cast a spell before Brickman has priority.
And then we'll see Brickman probably cast into the Flood Maw on the Omniscience. And the question will be, does Slimak have a removal spell? Oh, just a
Oh,
naked Omniscience?
yeah, interesting there. Looks like Oh, it looks like our table spotter accidentally gave the fish, forgot the omniscience was a creature in that moment. Gets the best of us.
No bargain necessary.
Yeah. It would be nice though if Brickman gave him a fish, a little friendly gift on
Yeah.
this Sunday afternoon. As more stock ups from Brickman, doesn't have the flurry of spells we've come to expect from this prowess deck.
Well, he does still have, multiple Swift Spears, could make a land drop and have 2 more spells after this stock up. That is not a bad start to this turn for Brickman, especially after having the Drake Catcher bounced early and the Corey Steel Cutter spell pierced. He just needs more total card volume in order to turn his prowess threats into real attackers.
Yeah. Looks like we're figuring out what we want off this stock up. Looks like Monstrous Rage is being thumbed. Trying to figure out if we want that card or not.
Yeah. Wouldn't be a bad turn for it since Slimak is tapped out. And Brickman could get in for a big chunk. It looks like he has a Monstrous Rage in hand. Didn't really want the second one.
Makes sense. As we attack in here with the newly casted Slickshot Show Off, John down to 9. Basically knows we have to do something this turn or things are going to be bad. Can have some interaction as it's just a land and a passing of the turn here. Brickman trying to figure out what he can and can't beat here.
Mainly have to think about Afara's Dispersal. So you really want to do the math here, assuming the Slickshot Show Off is gone. And with Slimak at 9, 4 spells would do it, or Monstrous Rage on Swift Spear would allow your Slickshot to live, because now the Swift Spear is the biggest threat. So
yeah.
This is currently 10. You have a 5-power Swift Spear, a 2-power Swift Spear, and a 3-power Slickshot. So that's lethal. This will force some action from Slimak, and wow.
Yeah, it looks like maybe Slimak, this actually was getting flooded out a little bit there, and that's probably why we saw the Abuelos, was just hoping to get a little lucky, and unfortunately didn't do it there. As Brickman with a slower start, but still gets it done.
Yeah, once there's no response to the bounce spell on the Omniscience, you have a pretty strong idea that Slimak's hand is quite bad. Maybe there's another Abuelo's Awakening in it, and he's thinking, okay, they might Burst Lightning my Omniscience, but then I'll just get it back later, and the Burst Lightning will be gone. And that's why he decided to run out the first one. But you really just you can't have any other spells at that point. He would have cast Coil and Catch, would have cast Moment of Truth, would have cast Stock Up, would have probably even cast, an Afara's Dispersal for free there if he had it. So you basically did know that your opponent's on empty at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's take a look over here at Slimak's sideboard and see what we could potentially bring in. As we have a Cathar Commander, 2 Voice of Victory, 2 Clarion Conquerors, a Kotsul Flanker, 2 Beza, 1 Boonbringer Valkyrie, 2 Overlord of the Mistmores, 2 Get Lost, and 2 Negates. Ross, what do you like in this sort of matchup?
So it's a lot of options. It really depends on how Slimak wants to approach it, how fair he wants to get. Because now with Voice of Victory and Clarion Conqueror as common sideboard cards, you can almost approximate an Azorius mid-range deck. You could bring in basically every threat here in the sideboard and have those and your removal spells and be very minimal on the combo and try to brick your opponent's counter spells. Or you can go minimal, just have maybe some Bezas. Maybe you want Clarion Conqueror to stop Ghost Vacuum or Soul Guide Lantern. Maybe you want Voice of Victory to stop counter spells, but not over sideboard and still be more combo heavy. Given that Slimak's sideboard is so heavy on these threats, I'm guessing he favors a more mid-range post-sideboard transformational plan, and that's what we're going to see here in Game 2.
That makes sense. Let's quickly check out Justin Brickman's sideboard and see what he has for his cutter sideboard. As you know, there's a lot of different 1 and 2 you can play here. So another Drakecaster, Enduring Curiosity, 2 Ral Crackling Wicks, 1 Into the Flood Moth, 2 Lithmantic Brush, 2 Spell Pierce, Torch the Tower, 2 Stroke, 1 Rebel Salvo, and 2 Ghost Vacuums.
So the cards that you definitely want are the counter spells, Spell Pierce and Disdainful Stroke, the Graveyard Hate, and those 2 copies of Ghost Vacuum. Those 100% come in. The extra into the Flood Maw will definitely come in a lockdown matchup. And at least, one or two of the fours will come in, maybe all three. Depends on how much Brickman wants to raise his curve. And then the real questionable cards are the 5 damage removal spells, Barrage and Salvo. How many targets are you expecting your opponent to bring in? This is the cat and mouse game that exists. The more Bezos and Voice of Victories and Clarion Conquerors that are in the post-board configuration for the Omniscience player, the more you want access to that removal. The fewer there are, the less you want it. And so it'll depend on how Brickman is anticipating his opponent to sideboard and what cards he's really fearing.
That makes a lot of sense. One of those spots too, where the open deck list of things like the RCs, you maybe have a little bit, you can hedge, right? You see this, you're like, all right, I'm going to bring the Rebel Salvo in, especially in this spot. Maybe I think, the way I'm sideboarding versus them, it makes me want to do it here. And, these closed deck list tournaments, you kind of have to, infer and figure out and really stay in tune with stuff. So advantages and disadvantages to both here. But Brickman is mulliganing to 6 as we can head back down our feature match area. The players are getting ready. I have to say, Ross, I think Enduring Curiosity is great in this deck. But it is so funny to me to see, the 8 creature deck, even though obviously you have more than 8 creatures. And it's like, yeah, I really need Enduring Curiosity. That's the card for me.
It's, you don't need, you read the card and you think, oh, this is great with, wide battlefields. You really don't need more than 1 or 2 creatures on the battlefield when you play Curiosity for it to run away with the game very quickly. It's sort of like the blue Craterhoof Behemoth in that regard. You think like, oh, they only have 1 or 2 creatures. How much damage could that be? Yeah, actually, you're just dead.
The blue Craterhoof Behemoth. I like that a lot. Commander players, we're reaching out. We're trying to create bridges. Meet us in the middle.
Hey, that card is standard legal now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's in Dragonstorm.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the next couple of years / whenever Pioneer comes back. Maybe we'll do a thing. And it looks like a little bit of a tank here from John. Started to want to keep the planes, decided to get rid of it. Maybe a sign that John has like 3-ish total lands, but wasn't sure if we want to keep the 4th as Swift Spear comes down and attacks for 1 off of Shivan Reef.
Could also be a landlight hand, but he really wants more blue mana. And he's like, well, I kind of want that land, but I don't want a plains.
Makes a lot of sense.
Although Island here suggests that that's not the case.
Yeah, it could be slow rolling the temporary lockdown. Like, oh no, I don't have it. Brickman taking a second to think. I like this, being really methodical with this play. Brickman and a couple other regulars who play a lot of control decks have really adopted this prowess deck in both modern and standard. I know Sean Gallagher is another one who really sort of typically only plays blue-white control. And Brickman's range is wider than that, but he really likes, Teferi, for example. But they're all sort of admitting like, hey, this Quarry Cutter card might be, the best way to actually play Magic right now.
And the prowess deck in either format, modern version or the standard variant, is not an all-in 100% balls to the wall aggro deck. You can play long games and grind it out with stock up Storm Chaser's talent, card advantage from Cutter as well. So you get to play a little bit of both styles, and that probably makes it an easier transition for players that are more used to playing control.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. As we do see Slick Shots plotted into another stock up here for Brickman. And taking a second to really make sure, and this is one of the hard parts of playing a card like stock up. It's very powerful and it's hard to go too wrong, but you are given a lot of choices that really matter.
Yes, and playing with the cantrips, trying to anticipate what is going on over the few turns that you have, and play multiple turns ahead is very difficult. Because sometimes, you want the monstrous rage because your opponent doesn't have the removal spell. Sometimes you want more card advantage. It really depends on what they have, and you've got to play this sort of risk assessment game where you are saying, if I take this card and get punished, how bad is it? If I take the other card and get punished, how bad is that? And then what are the likelihoods of getting punished or getting rewarded in either scenario, and weigh all of that in your head. You're just doing algebra all day long.
Yeah. And we're seeing John surveil, decides to keep some on top here. Notably, in the moment of truth, decided to bin the temporary lockdown. Did not want that card in the moment.
No threats on the other side of the battlefield. Maybe already has one in hand. Plenty of reasons to ditch it. maybe has a Boiler's Awakening and can buy that back, which is a nice trick that is even better in the post-sideboard games when you're less dependent on the combo.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it looks like Boiler's Awakening hitting the graveyard here. As we are going to see a Verge from turn for Brickman, making that 4th land drop. Slickshot Show-Up's going to get cast. Like you're talking about, this is a deck that is very proactive, but it doesn't mind drawing its 5th, 6th land in lots of games as a Ghost Vacuum gets played and attacking here a Slickshot for 3.
Yeah, and that is especially true in the post-sideboard games against the lockdown decks. You're playing all 4 stock-ups in that configuration. You're planning to play long games and potentially even use the value from Storm Chaser's talent. So, yeah, making 6, 7, 8 land drops can even be beneficial in these matchups.
All right. Gonna see John sculpt a little more. Play a Meticulous Archive. You mentioned how he might turn to more of a controlling deck post-board. We saw a Cathar Commando come down earlier on blocking duty. Sort of a way to answer some of the problematic cards in this matchup, but also, just blocked. It might be a sign that we did go more in that direction as we are binning a land off the Surveil land. And removing that lockdown with Ghost Vacuum, Brickman does not want to have to deal with that.
He knows there's very few cards that the Omniscience deck can actually recur from the graveyard. Might as well start by exiling all the enchantments.
5th land here for Justin. Quickly taps 2 mana. Another Slickshot Show-Off. Uh-oh. This could be a huge turn. A Sleight of Hand starts it off. Quickly bottoming the 1, and it looks to be taking a moment to double check something. I wonder if this is because we have some interaction, or maybe we think we could potentially push depending on how our opponent plays here for lethal. Another Afaras to answer this Slickshot Show-Off back to the hand.
And okay. Letting this resolve, that likely suggests Brickman has some interaction for the combo or for something like a Meringue River Regent. So we'd be surprised if there's a Disdainful Stroke being held back here, and he's just going to try to grind through the removal from the Omniscience deck.
Yeah, and really showing just how powerful this prowess deck can be. I mean, the big thing behind this Omniscience deck, right? Is we have the 4th one. Well, maybe this is part of the reason also we were down to go to that lockdown earlier, Ross, is we just had a bunch of these in our hand. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
As we're topping 2 immediately. But yeah, this prowess deck, it's putting up a great fight against this opponent who has a lot of removal and is sidestepping a lot of, the traditional cards that people have for them. As it looks like we are going to plot this Slickshot Show-Off now that we're not worried about cards like Meringue River Regent.
Okay.
All right, Meringue comes down. Just gonna bounce her.
You still have to be a little worried about this thing. It's a 6/7 flyer. It's hard to get slick shots up to a level where it can even trade.
Listen, sometimes you just have to send them into the Flood Maw,
Yeah. If there is, replay the other slick shot, play the one from plot, bounce your Regent, hold up Disdainful Stroke, that would be an excellent turn here.
Yeah, that would be a lot. And also put John basically dead to any 2 cards on the next turn. So, if Brickman has anything like that, we're looking to be in a good spot. It's also a pretty good moment for John to know if the coast is clear, right? Brickman, could have held up something like Disdainful Stroke on that previous turn and still pressure a lot, but might be a sign he doesn't have that or just isn't afraid. This turn will be a big deciding one in this regard. Stock up. Going back in the deck.
Interesting to see stock up without playing the slick shot from plot. Because presumably you're digging for into the Flood Maw here and wanting to bounce the River Regent.
Yeah, it did look like there was an Into the Flood Maw in the stock up pile as well. So I wonder if maybe Brickman is just setting up here for an end of turn, bounce the Meringue. Potentially even doing it on our own turn, if you have like a negate to back it up.
Yeah, and you might not want to do an end step because you could run into a Spell Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
That's a card you don't want to make live once we get to these mid-game scenarios and both players have 6+ lands.
Yeah. Lucasform Village. The name of that card was just discarded. The make my spells uncounterable land. Yeah, and you see Brickman sort of like, sure, whatever, man.
Surprise
Monster.
Silmac would discard the utility land if he has anything else, any other land, right? Because I guess it does enter tapped, so maybe you just can't.
Yeah, it looks like we have a stock up in hand, so this might just be a turn where we were hoping to get some interaction. If we fail, we just go land stock up.
Yeah, just needed to use all his mana. Okay.
Yeah, and this is one of the things, right? When you turn into that blue control, you mentioned making cards like Spell Pierce live. Well, there's Brickman's post-board Spell Pierce, and I think we might see some swift movement here because I know there's an Indo Floodmaw in hand.
Okay. So here's a cutter. I think this might have been a turn where you wanted to cutter after the slick shots, but because that's worth 4 damage. Here it's worth 3. Another spell would make it 4.
Yeah, it is one of those weird spots where maybe this actually is the right thing.
Okay, so this is the same, but you have an extra creature now. And is this lethal? So the slick shots are 5s. The cutter token is a 3, and then rage deals another 3. So
Yeah,
be exactly 16.
it does look to be exactly that, and I think Brickman, has 2 mana up, so potentially could even cast in like an opt if we're a tad short here, but that seems to be it. And yeah, Justin Brickman moving on to 5-1. Impressive stuff there from this Is It Prowess deck, and really showing why I think so many players, this is their weapon of choice for all the regional championships we've seen. While it maybe didn't win the Australian one earlier today, Demir took that down. It still had a great presence there, and all the USRCs and the rest of the world has just been the most dominant deck.
Absolutely. And, game 1, a little fortunate with the opposing draw not panning out well. But game 2 was textbook. That's exactly what you want to do with the prowess deck. You want to play a longer game, cast your stock ups early, and set up for 1 to 2 really big turns. And Brickman was able to do that. The first big turn got, countered by double Ephraim's Dispersal, and the second big turn was completely lethal. And that's really the power of Slickshot Show Off in these matchups, and why it is much better than Drake Hatcher against the lockdown decks.
And speaking of powerful, let's talk to Justin Brickman here. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm feeling good. Yesterday was a little disappointing, so I'm just glad to be playing standard, glad to be playing the deck I've been practicing for the RC and forward, and yeah, blue red spell's great.
Everybody loves a nice Is It Mediums deck. And taking a look over your list here, the one thing that really stands out to me is 3 copies of Monstrous Rage. This is often an auto 4 of in most lists, and a card that many players have called to be banned. So what's the reasoning behind trimming there as opposed to some other card?
So I found myself boarding out Slickshot in most matchups leading up to the RC. Obviously, like I added Enduring Curiosity to my sideboard since, so that kind of changes how I wanted Drake Hatchers or Slickshots in various matchups because the haste creature matters. But I just found myself boarding out 1 a lot in most matchups where I'm just like trying to hedge my deck to be pre-boarded well for the mirror, but not giving up percentages too much in other matchups. Like Omni specifically was one I felt really poor against last week. And I don't think Rage is that good in that matchup either because of Forest Dispersal. Like I just had one in my hand for 4 turns, just kind of holding it, waiting to get my spot. And yeah, I've just been kind of underwhelmed in it as I developed. Probably would go down to 2 at some point, but I think that might be illegal.
Yeah,
Sure.
it might be. I haven't checked. We'll have to look at the books, but I think that makes a lot of sense. To be honest, it's a card I definitely trim in sideboarding as well, and it does look like the way you've built your deck, you're trying to be a little bit more pre-boarded. In certain matchups, it looks like you're a little bit more threat dense with 5 2-drop threats, 2 Hatcher, 3 Slickshot Show Off. So I think you're set up to play the sort of trade removal game a little bit better without having Monstrous Rage that only really plays well in the racing games.
Yeah, I'm a control player at heart. Combat math is not my specialty, as those last couple turns probably showed. I had to triple check, do the math NAS, but I don't have a math degree. So I just built the deck to lean into my strengths, and I've been saying this for the last week and a half. This deck is basically Cobblade. So you have these especially the mirrors, you have a lot of intricate decisions to make. and it just leans into a tempo-oriented game style or play style that I tend to prefer.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, normally when I think of you, I think of controlling decks, right? And we saw Casey Miller win the United States RC, excuse me, playing Jeskai Control. Was that tempting? Is that something you tried out, or have you kind of stayed true to like this deck is the truth? I mean, comparing it to Caw-Blade, if you weren't around for that time, maybe you're an Arena Zoomer. That was one of the most dominant decks in Magic's history, sort of hailed as like the best standard deck ever. That's a lofty comparison. So have you stayed the course? What led you to this spot?
So I was originally going to play Mono Red because I liked mice after the last NRG where I played it in Pioneer, and I'm just like, okay, Pioneer felt great. I'll try it in Standard. Was doing well with it. Then Prowess became a deck, and I was just getting demolished by everything, and because people were just more ready for red decks,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of was like deflated. My friends talked me out of my butt, for lack of better terms. And I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna play Prowess. I'm not gonna mess with any of these 3-colored mana bases because they are god awful. And yeah, the rest is history. I haven't thought about playing any other deck in Standard, which when a control deck wins a tournament, it's really tempting. This one took a
Mm-hmm.
bit of self-control.
All right. Well, I like knowing ourselves and naked self-control. Thank you so much, Justin, for taking a second to
All right.
talk with us. Go have some fun between the next rounds, and hopefully we'll see you in our top
All right.
8.
Thank you.
No problem. Ross, now I think we actually have a backup match, so we're not done just quite yet. We're going to actually head over to Time Shift to Magic, but it was good to see. I like how honest Justin was. He's like, listen, I know I have a weak spot for control. It was tough, but this deck is Caw-Blade. I'm going to stick to it. I'll have to see. Eventually kids are talking about Corey Steelcutter as the new Caw-Blade.
Yeah, it's nice to see Magic players make a disciplined decision. This is the
Mhm.
deck that clearly I should be playing, and he gets rewarded for it. 5-1, very strong chance to be able to make this top 8.
Yeah, well, let's head on down and see if we're going to get someone else in top 8 here, as we have Will Krauchik on your left versus Justin Nielsen on your right. We saw Justin actually in the backup match last round as well on Jeskai Control. Started off 4-0, got beat by Demir, but still very live here for top 8 as our players are going to get started here with Mono Red Cutter on your left. So not Izzet Prowess. Ross, what's the reason to play Mono Red?
Well, you're more explosive, and a lot of the games in the Prowess Mirror end up being races. Mono Red tends to be favored in those races because of the power of Heartfire Hero, Manifold Mouse, and that combination with Monstrous Rage. You still have the cutter draws that can run people over. And then this build is playing Demonic Ruckus as a way to just increase its racing potential. So it's about being very explosive and then using cutter to give yourself resilience in the face of heavy spot removal. We just heard Justin Brickman talk about how he didn't like the traditional mice deck that he was thinking about playing because Izzet brought all this anti-red, cheap removal and other hate cards into the metagame. Well, the mouse deck, by adding cutter, gives itself similar resilience that the Izzet Prowess deck has.
Yeah, and we're seeing what was the scourge of old Standard here, Heartfire Hero into Manifold Mouse, and a huge attack here on turn number 3 for 7, knocking Justin down to 9. Now, there are a bunch of temporary lockdowns in Justin's deck here, along with the spot removal, but Will showing, why this deck is still a totally reasonable thing to do as Lightning Helix comes on down.
And now, does Will have anything that can target this Heartfire Hero? Would have to be a Monstrous Rage.
Oh, and it looks like Justin, with a small misstep here, got the Verges backwards, so we can't Lightning Helix down the Heartfire here. But instead, we're a split up. It might be better to do that anyways, so it worked out pretty well for Justin here, as he will take 3 from the Ember Heart. It was the Heartfire here, excuse me.
Does temporarily drop down to 6, but still has the Lightning Helix now in reserve to answer a follow-up threat and gain the life back.
Yeah, and Will, lost an extra creature on the turn, but gains the info of Lightning Helix, so has that on Will's side. Will, someone we've seen here for the last about 2 years in NRG series, has really come into their own and has been doing quite well. Qualified for the Pro Tour back at RC Charlotte, playing Breach, and has just been really having some great performances here. As Corey Steelcutter in to Emberheart Challenger come on down and attacking for 4.
That is a great follow-up to the sweeper. Knows he's going to lose one of these creatures to Helix, but should still have one back to try to close out this game.
Okay, there's I think that's a blue Verge. Is that not blue on the? I always get that one mixed up. Okay, that is the red
Fire
Verge.
Verge is red to start.
Okay. All right. I'm very lucky. I always have an island when I play the instant deck, so it's not a big issue. But okay, so we took down the Emberheart Challenger. Back up does Justin go, but not out of the woods yet. An attack for 2.
Ooh, looks like I had no spells back, so a very weak follow-up turn for Will Kowalczyk, and now Justin has a window to start slamming these haymakers.
Oh, and Will, as soon as we tap up the Shinko, kicks a Burst Lightning, 4 damage. Justin at 3 life. That's more than enough. Tight play there from Will, playing around any sort of counter magic there. Ooh, you love to see it.
Yeah, made it seem like his hand was weak. It was not weak at all. Had the lethal burn spell and demonstrated some great patience there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and spots like that are very important too, right? Like, very easily could have tried to fire that off on our own turn, try and get the win immediately, right? Don't do anything. We'll just kind of be like, hey, if nothing changes, I'm fine. What card can they play that's going to be that big a deal? I'll just wait here. Let's take a look at this sideboard really quickly here to see what Justin Nelson has over there. Looks like we got a bunch of Kotsul flankers, 2 Cheshire Tidebinders, 2 Whitley Leech, 2 Exercise, 2 Negate, a Pyroclasm, and Authority of the Council, and 2 High Noons. Ross, what do you like here?
I certainly like Authority of the Consuls and Pyroclasm. Those 2 look excellent. I'd be a little tempted by High Noon since this is a cutter deck, but much, much worse against the rest of the deck, the Mice Shell, than it would be against a pile of cantrips. So that makes it questionable to me. And you could play Kutzel's Flanker, but this is not like 3 mana, 3/1, try to block, gain 2 life. That was a play.
And Scry 2. All right, let's not forget the Scry 2.
That's the kind of card you played against aggro decks in like 2008, and it
wasn't good there. Speaking of aggro decks, let's check out Will's sideboard. As this is a time shifted match, we're gonna get you back there as soon as we can. But first, we have 4 Torch the Towers, 4 Sunspine Links, 2 Scorching Shot, 3 Lithomantic Barrage, and 2 Case of the Crimson Pulse. Ross, what do you like here?
I like a lot of this sideboard. The barrages and scorching shots are good against all the big creatures, Biza and Shiko. The Case of the Crimson Pulse gives him some additional card advantage, and Sunspine Links is a haymaker of a threat. I would certainly be bringing in the Lynxes and the Cases, and then some number of the 5 damage spells. I'm not sure if Will is going to want all 5 of them, but at least 3, I would say, of the 5. At least the barrages will be coming in, maybe the scorching shots as well. That'll mainly depend on how many cards he feels he wants to cut from his main deck, so how much space he has he can afford to those removal spells.
That makes sense to me. Well, let's head on back down to our feature match area, as our players should be ready here for game number 2. Looks like they're mulliganing right now. Will doesn't like it, going to go to 6.
And is that an Authority of the Consuls in Justin Nelson's opening hand? I think it is.
A little one of fun of on turn 1. Easy.
That's the turn you want it.
Yeah, well, we didn't put in our deck to draw it on turn 2. We didn't put in our deck to not have it. So obviously, when else are we going to have it? It just goes without saying.
I love it. It's my favorite thing to have a one of in my sideboard and just draw it. That's what I need. The second one would be bad.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that. That'd be silly.
Yeah, they can't enter double tapped.
It is funny that Authority has become kind of okay in doubles because of Into the Floodmaw, where it's like, okay, well, at least you can't Into the Floodmaw this, where in the past it's a card that, aggro decks are just cold to, right? Like Will has no way to interact with an enchantment. But as Into the Floodmaw has become, a 4 of in these prowess decks, it's sort of like, oh, actually, having the second one isn't great by any means, but it isn't awful.
Yeah. But once you have 2 of them, you're so down on resources, your opponent doesn't need to bounce them. They'll just play slow and kill you because you're on 5 cards.
Nah. As hard, I don't know why. Oh, we put it forward like Will was attacking. I was like, I don't think Will realizes his authority. It was just putting the card out there kind of aggressively. I like that. We are going to gain a life here from Justin. And Manifold Mouse coming down. And I mean, this is really the start that, really sold me on the Mouse deck. When you have this sort of thing here and your opponent can't interact, it is a really powerful start. Torch the Tower is going to answer the Heartfire Hero. No damage done since it does exile.
Yeah. We saw this same start in game 1 was excellent for Will, but this time Nelson has interaction for it. Authority and Torch greatly limiting the explosive damage output. But if he doesn't have a third land, it might not matter.
Yeah, and it looks like Challenger is going to come down. We're going to get rid of a Higher Claw thanks to the Valiant trigger. I bet we choose Trample.
Yeah, so Will choosing to forego a damage to try to get an Emberheart trigger because he did not have a third land either. So both players stuck on 2, but that is advantage red aggro deck.
Yeah, this is a huge spot to be. As it looks like Lightning Helix is going to be used in the main phase 1 before we get a chance to trigger. If you go to combat, will get to put the trigger targeting the Valiant, which means you will get the top card regardless. So you have to do this in main 1. Authority of the Consuls, though, makes it not as big a deal. Typically, this would be a spot where your opponent can maybe play something and kind of punish you a little bit. But looked like Justin maybe said, I'll do it in response, thinking that we get there and didn't. And then Monstrous Rage, Ross.
Yep. And this is why you want to main phase your damage-based removal spells.
Yeah, and the old instant speed tricked us here, as now this is huge. We are still going to get the top card. It's another Manifold Mouse.
Yeah. When it comes to whether or not to main phase your removal spells against a tapped out opponent or wait, you have to weigh the benefits of waiting against the risks. And there was no benefit to waiting. You're going to be forced to kill the Emberheart Challenger before combat anyway to stop that trigger. And so Will doesn't have to make any sort of move and give you any additional information, show what maybe a better target. So all you're doing is letting Will untap and potentially blow you out with Monstrous Rage. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, we see here, Will took a second to do the math, decides that the Burst Lightning is better here, gets the Prowess trigger and the double strike on this Emberheart Challenger, and knocks Justin down to 5 from at the start of the turn at 22, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, your control opponent misses a land drop and you're a red aggro deck. It's go for the jugular time.
Excuse me, 8. We had not quite factored in the Lightning Helix. That is my bad. Sunspine Lynx, unfortunately, here, getting exiled. Not a land. Both players stuck on 2, but like you said, this really favors Will.
Yeah, this is a 7-point attack already because the monster roll pumping Challenger, presuming it got double strike from the Manifold Mouse. So, yeah, Nelson does drop to 1, and now all Will needs is another Burst Lightning.
Yeah. Manifold Mouse enters. It should be tapped, and Justin should go to 2, but it's more than enough as Will is the victor here. Moving on to 5 and 1, and likely to see Will here in our top 8 at this rate. We're going to have to figure out all that here in a second as we still have round number 7 to be played, but in a great spot. And speaking of a great spot, Ross, we're going to some great places in season 2 here on the NRG series. So let's take a moment to see where we're going in the back half of this year. As July 19th to the 20th, Ross, we're going to St. Paul, Minnesota, and we're going Modern Showdown on Saturday. It's a 10K. You win one of those, you go straight to the end of the year championship. And then Sunday, 5K Legacy Trial. Legacy players, we hear you. We know you love to play some Paper Magic. Come on out. It'll be a great time there in St. Paul. August 23rd to the 24th, Lansing, Michigan. Standard 10K Showdown on Saturday. Sunday, Team 10K Trial. Standard, Modern, P format that people love, Pauper. We're giving you more Pauper. We came out. Listen, we had some bad times during Breach. Not all of us loved it as much as Ross did. And we ran a Pauper event, and you all really loved it. And so we're trying some more Pauper to see how people like it. So if you're a Pauper lover, please come out. Show the support, as we are still trying to figure out our next event, Sunday event. I'll get to that in a second here. September 13th to the 14th, we're back in the hometown of Mundelein, Illinois. Modern Showdown 10K on Saturday. And Sunday, we're figuring out what the trial is going to be. We're going to have that ready for you probably by the time our next event happens in June. We'll let you know. We might wait a little bit later and see how some of these other formats go, but we're going to figure that out, and we're going to give what's best for the players. Here on the Energy Series, we love to put you first, and we want to pick an event that players are going to love. And November 1st and 2nd, we're going to be in Elmhurst, Illinois to round out the end of the year here on the Energy Series. Saturday, Team 10K Showdown, Standard Sealed Modern. We also heard the love of Sealed. We have a Final Fantasy team event coming up in the end of June. We'll talk about it in a second as well. So we're putting more Sealed in there. And then Sunday, to wrap up the year, Modern 10K Showdown. The winner of both those events in November are going to go straight to our championship, which will happen in early December. We'll be streaming that as well, a $30,000 PTQ going on. And really quickly here, we can show our last event here for season 1. That's going to be June 28th, Final Fantasy Team Sealed. Now, June 27th, or the Saturday that, we're also going to have a standard event going on. So it's not just Team Sealed, but we are doing this We've heard from players. We used to do a lot of sealed back in right before the pandemic and right after, lockdown sort of ended. We had a lot of sealed. We stepped back a little bit, and we heard from y'all that you really missed that. So we're trying to work it back in and how it makes sense to do. And what better set to do it than Final Fantasy, already the best-selling set of all time from pre-orders. We hope it's going to be one of the best limited sets of all time as we bring you coverage as well. So make sure to follow along. You can scan the code on your screen to get more info on that. And Ross, speaking of info, we have side events at all our events this year from Value Vintage. That's right. Value Vintage is a pretty cool format that has been going around to a lot of events and has been at all of our events. It's basically the vintage format with a $30 limit on how much a deck can be, Ross. So there's a QR code on screen if you want to scan and get more of a, information there. But it's super interesting, vintage legality, you can play with anything. Now, technically, if you had a Mox that, was under $30 for your whole deck, you could do it. Typically not how the Mox in play, but, it's a very interesting format that's also kind of interesting self-correcting, right? Like if a deck in this format got really popular, then in theory, the deck has to change, even if maybe the whole core of the deck doesn't, right? Will and I were talking about this yesterday, Ross, where it's like, well, let's say, Lurrus becomes the best deck and Lurrus increases in price by $3 or $4. That doesn't ban your deck, but it might make you want to make card changes so that you are still under that $30 legality. Very interesting, very fun format to play with your friends, and they have side events going on at all the NRG series. And these players bring a lot of extra decks, so if you're new to the format, they know players are still picking it up. You can just walk over there, and I've seen them have a wheel where they just give, you spin the wheel and you play whatever deck you get, or they have a big box you can grab out. So really awesome. We'd love to see them at all our events and other events around the world. So thank you all so much for that. We are going to take a quick break right now as we're going to set up for our round number 7 and figure out who's going to be in our top 8. And we're going to bring you all of that here today. So stay tuned.